So, hello.
It's been a while.
It has been. I interviewed you in a noisy bar in Detroit 4 years ago,
Yeah.
which ended up being a very popular chapter in the Red Pill movie.
Mm-hmm.
And now, 4 years later, here we are in London attending the 4th International Conference on Men's Issues. And I think this is the first time in 4 years that I'm really formally speaking to you about the aftermath.
Oh yeah, as an interview and like interviewing me, speaking formally, publicly. Yeah.
So hi.
It's like I said, it's been a while. It's been a pleasure to know you.
You too. I think I've told a few people at this conference here that I'm terrified of you still 4 years later.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know.
Is that what he was referring to the other night?
And then
You realize you intimidate people.
Yeah. Well, I think
let me glower at you.
I think it's the information gap or the knowledge gap that's intimidating. You have such a wealth of knowledge up here, and I don't even think you share half of it to the public, probably. Or what's your take on that?
Well, I share as much as I have when I get the opportunity, but yeah, there's just never, I mean, if I had to talk about all of everything, that would be hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. So I suppose if you watched every single one of my videos and every single one of my interviews, you'd probably be quite filled in, but I don't think anybody really has time to do all of that. So
I haven't watched every video, but I've certainly watched what's most popular. So I think that's kind of the trend is what becomes popular becomes even more popular because people look up what's popular.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't want to talk too much about the conference. We've already done a few interviews about that, but I want to ask you some questions that I think I missed the last time we did our interview.
Sure.
So, do you hate feminists?
I don't hate anybody. You know, I mean, the thing is, and I have this conversation with my guy all the time. My fiance is, he has a really hard time dealing with the foibles of human nature and the ways people are imperfect or the ways they lie. One example would be somebody from a fairly wealthy family with lots of connections, going through an engineering program or some kind of university program and already having jobs lined up because people were making phone calls on their behalf. And those people tend to really want to promote a fiction that they're entirely self-made and they got there entirely on their own. And, so he's coming from this really, really, really working class background, and he's trying to make his way in that particular world. It's really frustrating for him. Not only to sort of be at a disadvantage in terms of he has no family, networks within that industry, no family connections, nobody's making any phone calls for him, but also having to hear people talk about how they did it all on their own and all of that, when he knows that's not the case for most of them. So, and he struggles with that, and I'm always just telling him, you just got to let it go. You just have to, they're just people. And they're not perfect, and they'll never be perfect, and they will never be what you want them to be. So you need to just let go of the anger and let go of the resentment and just let it go. So no, I don't hate feminists. I'm not even particularly angry at feminists. They're people, right? And they screw up. They have their delusions and illusions. They have their misconceptions about reality. They have their biases, just like everybody else, right? So, and I particularly disagree with them, and I want the narrative that they promote to go away, but I don't hate them. So.
Okay, you're just anti.
Very much anti, and I'm not anti-feminists. I'm anti-feminism, essentially, right? So it's really the ideology and the narrative that I want to get rid of, and I love it, and I have done this. I have had feminists, sometimes people who describe themselves as radical feminists, write to me and say, you made me rethink my whole position on all of these things. And some of them say I'm going to continue to call myself a feminist, but my eyes have been opened in a way as far as all of the things that I really wasn't looking at, the other side of the story, the other half of the picture, and I've changed my approach and my views on all of these things. And so,
Hold on.
yeah, so.
The conference center is under a airplane roadway, so.
Yeah, it's like every 15 minutes.
So there'll be a couple cuts in this.
Yeah.
All right, so go ahead.
So it's essentially like I actually, one of the things that I think everybody has to keep in mind, particularly in terms of polarized type of activism, so we see in the US, Republican and Democrat politics really polarizing. We see everything kind of pulling apart to the far ends of the spectrum. Whenever that's happening, I think it's really important to go out of your way to humanize your enemy, because when things are polarized and you start to dehumanize them, you start to actually not forgive them for the failings you believe that they have. That's when you can run into some real dangerous situations, I would say. So.
And echo chambers, probably.
Echo chambers, and also, things escalating into higher and higher degrees of hostility, and then into violence and stuff like that. When you look at sort of the politics that precede the takeovers of totalitarian regimes, the politics that precede genocides, right? They all have this sort of polarization of us and them, and then a sort of a campaign of dehumanization of the other side. Often it's both parties doing it to each other, and that's just a recipe for conflict and violence. So I don't want to go anywhere near that. So I go out of my way to essentially look at even my ideological opponents as they're just flawed human beings like everybody else. And I think they're wrong, but that doesn't mean that they're bad.
So, I mean, obviously you saw much of my journey in the Red Pill movie, and the film was released about 2 years ago, so I've also had a lot of thinking since then, and trying to figure out where are we going in the future and what's the best strategy and steps moving forward. And I've had a lot of people ask me if the men's rights movement is just the opposite of what feminism is doing, trying to bring a balance to the discussion by only focusing on men's issues rather than trying to be a gender equality movement for both sexes, which even if you did have a movement for that, probably there'd still be infighting over how the funds are allocated, and if we only have $10,000 for an ad to put on TV, is it going to be about a men's issue or a women's issue?
Right.
And that can lead to a lot of problems. So I do see the value in having a men's movement to bring up the issues that are neglected from feminism. But I see the next step as being bringing awareness, because you really can't have a good debate without both sides really understanding all the issues. And I think back when I was a feminist, what really made me uncomfortable talking to men's rights activists was whenever they would bring up topics I'd never heard of before. So you really can't engage in a debate if you have never heard of.
You're not educated on it.
Yeah. So I think the first step is awareness, but what's your take on that?
I think, and I say this all the time, is that politics and the law are always downstream from culture. I'll give the example of Governor Rick Scott in Florida. They had a alimony reform bill that would essentially end, except in exceptional cases, lifetime alimony in that state. That's actually still a thing. Men still have to pay their ex-wives for the rest of their lives often. And it would also introduce a rebuttable presumption of shared custody after divorce. So When we say shared custody, we don't necessarily mean like exactly 50% of the time with each parent, but something closer to 30, 70, 60, 40, 50, 50, somewhere in there, to maximize parenting time for both parents after divorce. So there were those things written into the bill, and interestingly, the alimony reforms proposed by the bill were lobbied for by a lot of people who believed that now that ever since the man session, the 2008 recession, so many men were thrown out of work and then ended up divorced that there were more women than ever paying lifetime alimony now to their ex-husbands, right? And something like 3 to 5% of lifetime alimony payers in Florida are now women, and that's unacceptable. Right? Because women shouldn't have to do that. Okay? And so there we were, 2013, this bill gets introduced. It has about 75-80% public support. And it passes both houses with flying bipartisan colors, right? Absolutely just, rocketed up through the houses. And at the 11th hour, the National Organization for Women's Florida chapter convinced Governor Rick Scott to veto the bill. Right? And this was a bill that had, remember, overwhelming majority of the population of Florida, both men and women, said, yeah, this is something that we should have. And then in 2014, he was reelected.
Wow.
Yeah, and until people are aware enough and also activated enough, care enough, because, that, I guess, when people were asked, would you support this bill, their response at that time was sort of along the lines of, do you want some dinner? And then you reply, yeah, I could eat. Not, I'm starving for this, or no, I'm really hungry, but yeah, I could eat. Well, yeah, they'd like to have it if they can, but, if they don't get it, they're not going to be angry, right? They're not going to be angry enough to not reelect him. And so that really seems to be what we need to do, is activate people within the culture, raise awareness, and raise the emotional investment in the goals, so that when Governor Rick Scott does that in 2013, gets reelected in 2014, and then in 2016, when a bill that fixed all of the problems he used as his excuse to veto it, in 2016 they reintroduced it, and he vetoed it again. Right? So essentially, we get the politicians we deserve, I guess. But the public has to not only be made aware, but they also need to be convinced to care. Really is what it is. And that really is the first step. So and no doubt that there is an information gap in the media. I mean, just this year, I saw the pink tax ad on pretty much every YouTube video I was watching for a week. This pink tax ad was coming up, and I mean, just so much misinformation. Obviously, the pay gap and all the stories around that. Me Too has obviously reignited a new kind of vigilante, extrajudicial, kangaroo court, star chamber type thing on the internet.
So, what do you think needs to happen?
Oh, I think it's already happening. There's a wonderful man down in the States. He's a lawyer. He runs an organization dealing with these issues, men's health issues in particular. And he asked me about 6 months ago if I would consent to him hiring a publicist for me. And I thought, okay, I guess. And up until, even while I've been here, I've had my publicist text me and say, can you be on at 10 o'clock Eastern time on whatever day on this radio station? And I've had to tell him no, and that's because it costs me 60 cents to send you this text. It's like, I can't do these but for the last several months, it's been, between 6 and 12 interviews a week on
Wow.
mainstream talk radio, regional and national talk radio shows. And the feedback, both from the hosts and from the occasional callers, been really, really, really positive. And I don't pull my punches. A lot of men who talk about these issues will be very circumspect and sort of give the disclaimer at the start and kind of, well, please don't take this the wrong way, but, kind of thing. And I just come out and say it. And I've been getting nothing but positive feedback from all of these interviews that I'm doing. So it's a huge positive response, not just from the callers and the sort of ordinary people on the ground, but something that I noticed from, back maybe 7 years ago, when I would do a conservative talk radio show, is they would think, well, I think all of this stuff you're saying is crazy, but I support your right to say it. Mm-hmm. But now I have all these conservative talk radio show hosts going, you're absolutely right. So essentially I do think that things are really changing. Men in particular, particularly men on the right side or the center to the right, are opening their eyes to this. Mm-hmm. Conservative women are speaking up and have been for quite a while. And so essentially I think that the Overton window is shifting quite nicely more towards a balanced view of gender.
So one of the most common arguments from feminists about MRAs is, what do they actually do? They don't do anything but complain or harass feminists.
Yeah, but complaining is raising awareness, isn't it?
That's true.
So essentially you can't, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. You can't actually make people aware that there's a problem unless you complain about it. And on top of that, in terms of getting things done, that's beginning a little bit in Canada, at least. The Canadian Association for Equality has raised enough money to open Canada's first domestic violence shelter for men in a major metropolitan centre. There are a couple of places elsewhere in Canada, kind of in small towns, where they will actually accept men into a shelter. I think in Strathmore, outside of Calgary, they have 2 shelter beds for men. They're not specifically for men. They're not only for men. Women can use them too, but they're there available to men if they need them.
Is that a new development?
That's been around for maybe 5 years now.
Okay.
So yeah, and but now there's going to be a dedicated shelter for abused men in the heart of Toronto, kind of thing. They've opened Canadian centers for men and families in various cities in Canada, which offer legal clinics and all kinds of other support, counseling, group therapy sessions, support groups, things like that. Mm-hmm. And they will give men who are in need vouchers for legal aid. Mm-hmm. So they're registered charities. So so we are seeing men's groups. They're not men. They're not specifically. They don't describe themselves as a men's rights group, but they have a focus on men's issues, and they are getting some things done. Their National Coalition for Men. They've launched their Supreme Court challenge to selective service and how it's male only. That's passed several attempts at getting it dismissed in the preliminary stages. So, I mean, there are things that are getting done. But really what I would say to feminists who criticize us for not being able to get anything done is okay, first, it would be great if you got out of our way, right? And second, it's really difficult to get things done. There's no money in male victims. So we're very, very, in terms of resources, very, very, we're like this tiny, tiny little thing compared to this multi-billion-dollar feminist movement, this sort of blob of feminist organizations and lobby groups. So there's that. They constantly delegitimize us and try to deplatform us. So they could stop doing that. Maybe we'd get more done if they stopped doing that. And on top of that, they had the benefit of being able to exploit age-old cultural ideas about gender and instinctive feelings about gender in order to get the stuff done that they wanted to get done. So it's very easy to convince people to donate to end violence against women or stop wife battering or whatever. It's very easy to convince people that this woman who's beaten by her husband is a real, true victim, right? That she's an innocent victim, that she deserves support and care, right? It's a completely different thing to try and convince people that even a man like Ian McNichol, who we saw speak and who was featured, the articles about him were featured in the Red Pill, that he's actually a real victim and he really deserves help and support. Someone like him, the fact that when his girlfriend was released on bail after having assaulted him, right, viciously assaulted him, the police dropped her off at the house where they lived together.
Can't believe that.
Right? It's just like, we just don't think in those ways. And so men's rights activism is trying to convince people to embrace an entirely different way of thinking and viewing the world and men and women and how they relate to each other in it. Whereas feminism essentially took a lot of age-old ideas about women's capacity to be victimized and just capitalized on them. And that's a huge money machine. I know you interviewed Erin Pitsey, and she said, well, it was a fashionable cause. Domestic violence was a major producer in terms of capital, pulling revenue in.
And now Me Too is.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. So.
Yeah. Okay, so the funding gap is a major contributor to preventing men's issues from getting out there.
And the psychology gap, too.
And that took me a long time. I mean, the 2-hour film of The Red Pill did not adequately represent the 3 years that it really took me to look hard into my own ideological rose-colored glasses and start to peel back the layers of my own bias, like I talked about in my TEDx talk.
Yep.
It took 3 years from starting the film to actually dropping the label of feminist. And, I don't call myself anti-feminist, I don't call myself a men's rights activist, but that won't prevent the media from putting my name alongside Richard Spencer saying I'm an influencer of the far right.
Oh, yeah. Isn't that lovely? How they do that?
Yeah. So
I'm on the SPLC's website listed by name. Karen Straughan. Karen Straughan, a male supremacist enabler. I'm so proud.
Wow. So what is your take on the recent SPLC now officially classifying A Voice for Men as a hate group?
Well, they didn't officially classify them as a hate group. They classified them as a male supremacist organization.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay, good
and then they classified
clear.
Me and Erin Pitsey, and I forget who else there was listed there by name, as male. Helen Smith, Dr. Helen Smith.
Oh,
as male supremacist enablers, yes.
Okay.
So I'm just like, okay, well, an equality group is male supremacist, whatever. But I honestly, did you hear about the lawsuit against the SPLC? A couple of years ago, they listed Majid Nawaz. He's a moderate Muslim.
Okay.
He started a foundation, I think it was here in Britain, called the Quilliam Foundation. It's a non-profit, anti-extremist, anti-jihadi organization. And he works with, people of all races and religions, right? It's a very pluralistic foundation. His organization is pluralistic. Very pluralistic in terms of both ethnicity, and religious background. The SPLC called him an extremist and a leader of a hate group, founder of a hate group.
Wow.
And he sued. And they paid him, in a settlement, $3.375 million.
Whoa.
Because they lied.
Wow.
And it was defamatory. And they probably realized that he could get more in a court of law, in an award by a jury. So essentially, the SPLC lacks all credibility, and they came out and apologized and said, "Well, we were wrong about that. We kind of jumped the gun. We just made assumptions and then we published them. We didn't really look into it." So that is essentially their excuses. We didn't really look into any of this before we published these defamatory claims, right? So don't be mad at us. The FBI also about 2-3 years ago, they used to use the SPLC, their hate watch and hate map. They used to use that as a source to keep track of actual hate groups in the United States. And a few years ago, they dropped them as a resource. So yeah, the FBI has essentially said, we're not using these people anymore.
Wow.
And then I have to wonder too, is Antifa listed on the SPL's
I haven't seen it.
website as a hate group? Because the U.S. government listed them, publicly announced that they are considered a terrorist group by the national security.
Oh, really?
Yeah, by national security.
Oh, I didn't read
yeah.
about that. Interesting.
Yeah, they are a terrorist group, domestic terrorist group.
Huh.
So.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't want to hold you forever, but I do have a question I really want to pick your brain apart on because it's very relevant to my personal life. A couple weeks ago, I got married.
I know. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you. And even at this conference, the 4th International Conference on Men's Issues, marriage has been a big topic of debate. Paul Elam gave a presentation basically as a rallying call to reject the institution of marriage. And of course, for me, that was hard to hear since I'm just a couple weeks now married. And so what are your thoughts on marriage?
Oh, geez, they're my thoughts. They sort of mirror my thoughts on a lot of traditional institutions, a lot of cultural traditions. I really, really enjoyed that the Church of England priest and his talk that he did today. Because he talks a lot about traditions, even though the justification might be, because God wants you to do this. A lot of them have a function that is maybe flying under the radar. So, with marriage, the justification would be God wants you to do things this way. But the function of marriage it's like nowhere in the Bible does it say if you destroy marriage, society will fall apart, right? Or children will grow up to be delinquent or anything like that. That's not really in there. It's not a sociological text. It's a sort of a archetypal narrative. But I do think marriage is actually really important. I lament the cheapening of it that's happened over the last ever since the 80s when no-fault divorce was brought in. And even earlier, during the period after the Tender Years Doctrine and default mother custody became the norm, which was, depending on where you are, anywhere from 1865 to 1910 or so, divorce rates immediately skyrocketed after that, even though divorce was really difficult to come by. So essentially, marriage serves a very, very, very specific function, and that is to strengthen the relationship between fathers and children, to strengthen it legally, to bind them together legally, to bind them together economically, and to bind them together emotionally. All of that is strengthened by there's this kind of truism or like a little kind of jokey saying in certain parts of the manosphere, not necessarily in the men's rights area of things, but in the pickup artist and red pill and
the Reddit.
Those types, the red pill Reddit areas, the more masculinist areas, that men love women, women love children, children love puppies. Okay, and when you look at that sort of the man loves the woman loves the child, you see that the child and the father are actually quite far apart, even though their relationship is extremely vital. And marriage tied men to their children in all of those different ways and held them responsible for the children they sired so that other people would not be held responsible for them, right? And that seems to have created a social atmosphere, a social environment in which all of this around us was made possible. Is men doing for their children by being married to their children's mothers. Right? That seems to be, at least in my opinion, one of the necessary ingredients of civilization. And so I think we throw it away at our peril. Now, I would agree with Paul Elam that in today's legal and social climate, I would not be happy if one of my sons came home and said, I'm getting married.
Even knowing the importance of the father connection to the child?
Getting married doesn't necessarily mean having children either. But I actually would advise both of my sons to think very, very, very long and hard how much risk they're willing to bear. Especially considering that, statistics show that you get more sex from your girlfriend than you do, or your fiance, than you do from your wife. Your children aren't going to be your own anyway. They can be taken away at any time. So essentially, and you're living at the mercy of, the mother of your children, your wife, can make decisions that completely exclude you from the calculation regarding those decisions and be enabled by the state and get legal aid, right? While you have to pay for your own lawyer. So, it's the unfairness of the contract or the absence of a contract right now, because it really isn't a contract anymore.
But what it sounds like is you would ask of your sons or give the advice to any young man, don't get married because of the risk, therefore also never have children.
That's the really awful part, and that's why I'm trying to do what I do so much. I'm trying to raise awareness because people need to realize, right, that, I have 3 kids who are genetically mine, right? And being a mother is one of the most amazing, fulfilling things that you can do as a woman, even as a butchy kind of woman like me. And being a father, I'm sure, is extremely fulfilling. My fiance is 13 years younger than me, and he is now kicking around the idea of, okay, I think I may have changed my mind, and I may actually want a kid of my own. And I don't know how I'm going to go about it because you've got your tubes tied, you're 47 years old. I've had a vasectomy. I had it 15 years ago.
Wow.
And so how would I go about this? And I think it's important enough that at 47 I would do it over again. You saw me with that baby in the overflow room.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, smell the head, and it's like I'm gonna put that baby in the carry-on luggage, take it home.
So what are you and your fiance gonna do?
We're not sure yet. We're gonna look at our options. I'm probably not going to steal Natoya's baby, even though I'm tempted. But yeah, I am looking at, because I think that's a really important thing. It's kind of the whole game of being alive. It's the whole evolutionary process. It's the whole purpose. It's the whole point, if there is one, right? To the entire shebang is to pass on your genes, right? And because you're the product of people who did that.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try and help make that happen, and I'm willing to. I would have thought if you'd asked me 10 years ago, would you ever have another kid? And I'd be like, hell no. But I'm at the point now where I'm like thinking I'm 47 years old. Okay.
Wow, you do not.
How old
47.
how old will I be when they're a teenager? Okay, I may be able to live with that. So yeah.
You good. Well, okay, so I still don't really know where you stand or what the answer
We
is
need to
regarding
fix marriage. We need to
Okay.
fix marriage. We do. We absolutely do. We need to fix it. We need to have social policy that strengthens it. We need to have legal policy that makes it a little more difficult to just decide to leave because for the last 6 months you're unhappy. Like when I went my divorce was a 5-year process of making up my mind.
Yeah.
Of making up my mind to ask for it.
Oh.
Just to, from
okay.
when I was like, I think I want a divorce, to, okay, I'm prepared, I'm sure enough now to upend everybody's lives and ask for a divorce. Most women are not like that. Even men who file for divorce, they usually don't give it that much thought and that much time. When I went to speak to a lawyer, he said he was obligated by law to inform me that couples counseling is available. To, sort of marriage counseling, reconciliation counseling is available. And I'm the kind of person that, it was a 5-year decision. I'm not changing my mind. But I think that maybe even something like that needs to change to, yes, you and your partner, soon to be ex-partner maybe, are going to go into counseling. And that counseling will not necessarily be aimed at keeping you together, but you can explore whether you're going to stay together, and if you ultimately decide not to, how best to separate with the least upheaval to your family. I think that would be excellent. And I think that it should be mandatory. I do. I mean, a divorce is a legal process. It engages the courts. It costs taxpayer money. Why shouldn't the taxpayer require that people be absolutely sure and not be divorcing for no good reason? It's the same reason why they make sure that a woman is absolutely 100% sure that she wants tubal ligation, right? To the point where if you haven't had kids already, they probably won't give you one if you have publicly funded health care. It's because they don't want you to reverse your decision, go get a reversal, you pay for that yourself maybe, but then have to get another tubal ligation later. They don't want to waste the money. So, and when you think about the costs to the taxpayer in terms of just the costs of the actual divorce, and then also the costs to society following that, including more government money going to mothers with sole custody, just in terms of income top-ups and tax deductions and things like that. I think that society deserves a say in sitting those people down and guaranteeing that, having them guarantee that they really are sure that they want to go through this, and then going through a process, if they are sure, of finding a way to do it that minimizes the damage to their children and to each other.
Yeah. Learning about single motherhood and the effects of children just growing up with a mother present has been one of the biggest red pill moments through this whole process, and now I see it everywhere with anyone who turns out to be an abuser or something. You can find that they're usually raised by a single mother. And also the argument that I've heard from a lot of men's rights activists that the left is wanting to replace fathers with government. And have the government be the protector and provider through taxpayer services.
Well, what you have to think about too is like there's a cost to being in a relationship, right? In terms of what is being asked of you, right? And what you have to invest in it. So if we could put a cash value on that, right? I don't know how much it would be, but when I think about all of the benefits that come to women who choose to create families on their own without a father, or who divorce and maybe go on welfare and all of that. A man has to earn about $60,000 a year to compete with that.
Wow.
At least just in financial terms. And then he's asking her to put up with him as well. So, those things are disincentivizing women from actually saying, okay, I'm going to be realistic. And, one of the interesting things too is that a lot of women who settle, right? So they don't end up marrying Brad Pitt or Evan. But they settle, but settling often is just being realistic about your expectations as to who you can attract and who you can convince to be in a relationship with you. But as long as women have this subsidy to build a family without having to engage the voluntary investment of a man and commitment of a man, you're going to find more and more men who are just unable to compete with the government and the subsidies.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember if it was you, tell me if it was you or someone else I was watching on YouTube, but they said that divorce used to mean I'm not happy, or happen because the woman is not happy.
Not 100% content, yeah.
And now divorce is the woman thinking, I could be happier. Was that you that said that, or someone else?
I don't know, but that's a good point. I can leapfrog, my way up in terms of, is he better looking? Does he please me more? Does he have higher status? Does he earn more money? Whatever. So kind of some women, not #no all, but some women do look at that as a way of leapfrogging up in status. This phenomenon of women sort of marrying up a ladder, repeatedly marrying up a ladder, it's quite recent, and I think it is it's been brought about by, interestingly enough, the adjustment in the power balance within marriage, and also the sort of political equalization of men and women, and largely economic equalization of men and women, is that when you had men and women in different roles, and women really couldn't embody a man's role, and a man couldn't really embody a woman's role, at least it wasn't socially acceptable to do so, the woman would choose a man based on certain criteria. Most women want to marry someone who is higher up the social hierarchy, earns more money than her dad or herself. But what you have is when men and women are of equal status, just in general, and they get married, and then she has the upper hand in the marriage, all of a sudden he's beneath her in status. And so that urge to have married up, that's gone. That's gone. Because now he's of lower status than her. He's of lower legal status. She has all kinds of claim onto his money. His social status now belongs to her in many ways. And so she is now looking down at him instead of looking up at him.
So you're saying, are you saying that hypergamy actually did serve a good purpose in equalizing the respect, or at least the woman seeing what he brings to the relationship?
Hypergamy, when it's actually channeled, constructively channeled, there's nothing wrong with it. It's there for a proper purpose. It's there for a good reason. If I'm going to be laid up for 2 weeks with a newborn baby, I'm not going to be going out hunting mastodon, and I'm not going to be fighting off cave bears, right? I need a man who can do that, and I want a man who is going to be able to do the best job of that as he can, so I'm going to look for the best man that's actually available to me, right? The highest status, most capable, most economically viable man that I can actually attract. Absolutely 100% fine. No moral valuation placed on that at all. Like I said, it's there for a reason. Helps babies survive. But when you have a situation wherein the moment a woman gets married and locks him in, if she's extremely of this type of, has this impulse in it.
It must be every 2 minutes.
Oh wait, it's gone. If her impulse or her hypergamous instinct is quite extreme, quite strong, she will actually see him as beneath her the moment that she's locked him in, because she knows she can walk away from the marriage benefiting more than he will, right? So she might marry a wealthy man, and after 2 years of being married to him, walk away with half of his fortune, right? And she gets to take that with her, and then the next guy she's looking for, right? And the next guy she can actually get is an even wealthier one, right? So I mean, this leapfrogging up using marriage is I think it's kind of a new thing. I think it's based on sort of the legalities of marriage itself and what happens after marriage ends, and also social norms and things like that.
So if we made divorce more difficult, is that going to be dangerous for women in an abusive relationship, or men in an abusive relationship?
I'm sure it'll be difficult for some people. I think that honestly, if we had proper and plentiful services for both men and women who were actually in abusive relationships, because I don't even think that we actually have enough services for female victims. There's waiting lists and things like that often. So we could get more of those going. And also a form of due process in terms of, she doesn't just get to walk up to a judge and say, well, I'm scared he might become violent, and then the judge bangs his gavel and says, restraining order granted. If we actually introduced a bit more of a process that involved actually looking into things, that would be great, and that might be able to mitigate that. Also, mandatory counseling would probably be able to spot that kind of thing. So, mandatory couples counseling or end of the relationship counseling would probably be able to
on the couples
screen
bill?
for that. I would be, like if we're going to live in a system where, say in Britain or Canada, I think I don't think that there would be a problem with that being government funded. Particularly given the savings on the combativeness and the extra court costs and the taxpayer expense of dealing with a combative divorce rather than a cooperative divorce. I think that it would pay for itself, essentially.
I could see a lot of American feminists having issue with having to pull out of their own pocket to pay for therapy.
Or anything, not even their birth control they don't want to pay for. So,
well,
jeez.
I mean, I can see the benefits of the proposal you're making, but I can see a lot of resistance. Yeah. Okay, so for young men watching this interview right now, would you say don't get married, don't have children?
Don't get married.
And don't have children?
Use a surrogate mother and get a really good lawyer to write the contract. No, getting married these days is it is essentially signing a legally binding blank piece of paper. And the terms that you agreed to, all of the clauses in there, right? The legally enforceable clauses, those won't be decided until the moment that one of you decides to dissolve the contract, and at that point it'll probably be decided by a third party or by your lawyer's recommendation of how things are likely to go if you let a third party decide. So essentially, it's not a contract anymore. It's not. Or it's not a contract between two people anymore. It's a contract between a man and the government. And with having kids, I would just, and I hate to say it because, men want kids too, but I would think long and hard, and when you find a woman that you think you might want to have kids with, don't take the condom off until you're 100% sure. Don't trust her when she says she's on birth control, right? Don't until she's proved herself over an extended length of time that she's, at least, there's a 90% chance that she's not going to abuse her power to destroy your relationship with your children. I would say just be very, 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 very careful. Run her through some tests, character tests. Also math tests.
And show her the Red Pill movie.
Yes!
And thank you for wearing a Red Pill t-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Karen, it was very good catching up with you.
Yeah, you too.
Of course, every interview I do with you has sound issues, so every cut in this video was an airplane going overhead.
Oh, my God.
But this was really fun, and I hope we get to do it again before 4 years passes.
Excellent.
All right.
Anytime.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.